So our next speaker is Rabbi Ben Freed. He's the current rabbi here at Knesset Israel in Louisville. He was ordained at the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York, where he also earned an MA in Jewish thought through the prestigious Gladstein Fellowship in Entrepreneurial Rabbinic Leadership. Rabbi Freed served as a student rabbi in Little Rock, Arkansas for 2 years. He was a rabbinic intern at the Conservative Synagogue in Riverdale, New York, and in Jerusalem. He also has completed extensive training in pastoral care through the University of Michigan. As an Ohio guy, I will forgive you for that. University of Michigan Hospitals, and in community organizing through Join for Justice. Prior to rabbinical school, Rabbi Freed earned degrees in journalism and Middle Eastern studies from the University of Texas. He worked as a reporter, yoga instructor, Uber driver, and in the spirit of the gospel panel that we had and the musical stuff we saw last night, where a lot of the folks that were playing at church and singing in the gospel choir and playing in the band in the gospel church on Sunday, they were also playing in bands on Saturday night, having a lot of fun, it sounded like. So Rabbi Freed is also a bar mitzvah DJ, in case anybody needs anything. So please help us welcome Rabbi Ben Freed.
Thank you all so much for being here, and thank you, Tim, and just to echo Rhonda, what an honor it is to be on this panel with these really, really wonderful people who I have already learned from and look forward to continue learning from. Ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha. Not all of you might know what that means, but when I tell you what it does, you'll probably recognize it. From Vayikra, from the book of Leviticus, love your neighbor as yourself. Perhaps one of the most famous lines of the whole Hebrew Bible. And according to one rabbi, Rabbi Akiva, one of our great rabbis in the Jewish tradition, this, he says, is klal gadol b'Torah. This is the most important thing. This is the most important thing you can learn in the Torah. But there are two important critiques of Rabbi Akiva and of this line, love your neighbor as yourself. The first one comes from one of his contemporaries, a rabbi named Ben Azai. Ben Azai says, with all due respect, Rabbi Akiva, you're a big deal, but v'ahavta l'recha kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself, that's not the most important line. That's not the most important thing in the Torah. The most important line in the whole Hebrew Bible and the whole Torah is ele toldot ha'adam, is these are the generations of Adam. Which comes from, if you're familiar, if you've read the book of Genesis, there are a bunch of these long lists of genealogies. This person begat this person begat that person, and so on and so forth. And one of them is introduced, these are the generations of Adam. It's kind of a shocking pick for the most important thing, right? One of them says, love your neighbor as yourself. The other says, no. It's this beginning of a list of a lot of people who had kids. But the reason is that what Ben Azai is saying is actually the first critique of this line, Ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, is it relies on the way you feel about yourself for how you feel about others. That ele toldot ha'adam, what this first introduction to a genealogy in the Torah teaches us is, as Rhonda so beautifully said, that we all start from this point of radical sameness. And in my tradition, that radical sameness is that Adam, that the first human, was created b'tselem Elohim, was created in the image of God. And so therefore, if we are all descendants of that same place, if we all go back to that radical beginning, whether or not that's in a secular or religious way, that we recognize that everyone has intrinsic value. That it's not just that I love someone else because I love myself, I love them because they are them, because they are human. Perhaps you believe that's because they're created in the image of God, or perhaps that's simply that they have human worth and dignity as a fellow descendant of our common ancestors. So that's critique number one. Critique number two comes from the Torah itself, from the Bible itself, because it only says once in the whole Torah, Ve'ahavta l'recha, and you shall love your neighbor. But there's another line that appears 37 times, and that's the title of our discussion today. Ve'ahavta et hager, and you shall love the stranger. And you shall love that which is not perhaps your neighbor. You shall love those who are perhaps not the exact same as you. Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, Zichrono Livracha, who is the former chief rabbi of the United Kingdom, said that we have to recognize that the Torah tells us over and over again to love the stranger, and only once tells us to love our neighbor. And why might that be? Rabbi Sacks says, because at the end of the day, it might not always be easy to love your neighbor. I don't know what kind of neighbors y'all all have, but it is natural that as human beings, we are tribal people. We generally want to love those who look like us, who think like us, who act like us, who live in proximity to us. That is not so hard. What's really hard, what's really difficult as humans, and not because we're born this way, but as Rhonda said, because we are learned this way, we are taught this way, what can be really hard is to love the stranger. What can be really hard is to love the person who we don't have that natural connection with, who we don't feel as though we are the same as them. And that is precisely why it is repeated over and over again. Because the Torah, the Bible, is a document that recognizes human frailty. It recognizes where we will fall short, and it tells us over and over again, hey, you're not gonna wanna do this. It's gonna feel really hard. It's gonna feel unnatural. But it is so, so important. And the injunction to love your neighbor not to love your neighbor, to love the stranger is often followed by another line in Hebrew. It's often followed by a line, Ki gerim hayitem be'eretz Mitzrayim, because you yourselves were strangers. That we all have experiences where we have felt othered, where we have felt different, where we have felt like we don't fit in. And we are meant to draw upon those when we look at others and feel that most basic human feeling of empathy, of being able to recognize that why must I love the stranger? Because, as Rabbi Sacks said, the stranger is me. That we have the responsibility to recognize that we have all been in that place and that we must all look out for those who are currently experiencing what it means to be a stranger. It's been a really hard month for me personally. I'm sure it's been a really hard month for many of you. I don't know if any of you have family or friends who are living in Israel or in Gaza or the West Bank. If you do, I hope that they are physically safe. I know that no one who lives in that region right now is emotionally okay. And it's been really hard to think about this line, to love the stranger, when it feels like there is such a lack of empathy for the other, both in the Middle East and, as I've experienced, here in America. I see people who are nominally supporters of Israel saying things like there's no such thing as a civilian in Gaza, and it hurts my heart. I see people ripping down posters of hostages, some as young as 3 years old, who were taken by Hamas and who are being held captive, showing no remorse for humans who simply woke up one day to gunmen in their house pulling them into captivity. And I see a complete lack of love, a complete lack of empathy. I'm not here today to tell you that I think I know what the political or military or other solution is. It's a lot easier to put things in on a bumper sticker or in these days on an Instagram panel. But I think that a big problem here is that we have forgotten what it means to love the stranger. We have forgotten what it means to look at someone else, even if they don't look like us, even if they don't dress like us, even if they don't pray like us, and to see a human being. And I believe that that is where we must start. And I don't know where that leads us, and that's scary. Because there are a lot of people, whether they are Israeli, whether they are Palestinians, who are looking at the stranger and they feel or they hear that the stranger does not love them, or in some cases that the stranger wants them dead. And what do we do with that? How do we show that radical love in the face of a lack of love in return? What does that look like? I don't know the answer. I wish I did. It would be nice as a rabbi, as a religious leader, to be able to stand up here and say, I can tell you exactly how to think about this. But in the spirit of radical vulnerability, sometimes we just don't know. But when we just don't know, what we have is the opportunity to return to our morals, to our values, to our teachings, to the teachings of V'ahavta l'recha kamocha, to love our neighbor as ourselves, to look out for those who we hold dear, and to the teaching of Ele toldot b'nei Adam. These are the lines of Adam, recognizing the intrinsic humanity in every person, and the teaching of V'ahavta et hager, and you shall love the stranger. Because it is only by returning to these teachings, it is only by returning to these ideas that we can begin in any way to move forward together. I wanted to close by sharing some lines of a poem written by Danny Siegel. If you always assume that the person sitting next to you is the Messiah, waiting for some simple human kindness, you will soon come to weigh your words and watch your hands. And if they so choose not to reveal themselves in your time, it will not matter. May we all learn to see each other, whether we are neighbors or strangers, as humans, as carriers of divine spirit, and as those who we are called upon, who I believe we are obligated to love. Thank you.